closer to the road. Sorry. I started reading Ben Thompson's interview with Zuckerberg and Satya Nadella. I haven't finished it because Ben Thompson interviews are thorough, as I think most would say Ben is in general. Keep it up. Uh, so it's going to be the second part in a series of thoughts labeled Zuck Gets It. Maybe we should be afraid of that. I don't know. Anyway, Ben, my concluding thought about the metaverse when it was a big topic last year is that it seems that enterprise is the obvious place for it to start. That's why I tipped Microsoft as being the favorite in the space. Satya Nadella. Of course, we want to bring the two things together where we can to create magic, but at the same time, I also want our application experiences in particular to be available on all platforms. That's very central to how our strategy is. You're going to have a Mac or a PC, you're going to have an iOS or an Android phone, and maybe you'll have a headset. So if that is your life, how do we bring, especially Microsoft 365, all of the relationships that are set up, the work artifacts I've set up, all to life in that ecosystem of devices? This to me is important to highlight for a couple of reasons. Number one, I don't think there's any other way to read it. Satya is basically saying Windows is not our future. Our future is in delivering a particular set of experiences, a particular set of apps and workflows to people, to the widest number of people, to the largest possible TAM, more than operating systems. And that's a big deal for Microsoft, for those of us who are old enough to remember when, it was Microsoft. The second thing, the question that raises for me is, to the extent that Microsoft is going to become, in their own parlance, an ISV, which they actually refer to themselves, or they are referred to later in the interview, how much loyalty are they going to demonstrate to Meta? The shadow of the 800-pound gorilla in this room is Apple getting into the headset market. There will be plenty of time to pontificate about Apple getting into the headset market. But for this precise conversation, diatribe, you're not talking. It's just me talking. Monologue? I should give myself a little more credit. It's a monologue. Apple enters the market, and other Samsung maybe enters the market. Maybe somebody goes straight to the manufacturing source and we see an upstart bespoke player, maybe what's left of Playground, right? The sort of Andy Rubin workshop that produced the last smartphone that Rubin was involved with. Like, there's at least one other player. It's Apple. There may be more. But for the purposes of this conversation, let's just talk about Apple versus not Apple. How much loyalty is Microsoft going to demonstrate to Meta here? Is there a deal in place? Are they going to cut off their nose to spite their face because the partnership is sufficiently important to them? I kind of doubt it. It would be counter to exactly what Nadella is describing Microsoft as, but it's worth paying attention to, right? If the experience of Teams, Excel, what, whatever tool you can name, if those experiences are materially better on a meta device than someone else's, that could be frustrating for a lot of folks. But anyway, sort of put a pin in that, keep track of it later. Back to the interview. Thompson, the reason I've been optimistic about enterprise in this space is that it just made sense from a go-to-market perspective. Specifically, it's hard to grok the value of this VR stuff until you try it. And a good way to try it is for your employer. It is your employer gives you a headset, and thus you have no choice. But then, if you like it, you might want to use it at home, which mirrors the PC adoption cycle. Zuckerberg. I think work software is pretty different from social software. And then there's a range within work. Enterprise is almost its whole own beast. And Microsoft, I think, is really the leader and the best at this, and has been for quite some time. Mark again. There are these two logical zones to build out the next platform, and consumer is obviously where we focus the most. But there are 200 million new PCs that are bought every year primarily for doing work. That's a huge part of the market. And what we realized early on was that we had a place in helping to build out that platform. Again, numerous interesting threads to pull on there. The one that jumps out at me, though, is I feel like Zuckerberg is framing work software as a subset of social software. That may be my philosophy, my point of view, my bias bleeding in here. But I don't name me a kind of work that isn't social. Like, there aren't a lot. Like, you can be John Grisham and park yourself in a stone building that's 100 years old on a piece of property you bought somewhere in New England, and you're not working with anyone. But frankly, right up until the moment where you need to hand a manuscript to an editor, then that's a social experience. So it's interesting to me to see Mark sort of deflect, even without being prompted, the idea that there's a distinction between work software and social software. That said, the distinction that I think is very clear is that work software is a subset of social software, which is to say, the things one does using social software necessitate and are built on top of social software. And this is where I think we get to the last useful chunk from what I've read thus far. Satya, in fact, when Mark and I first talked, he talked about, quote, hey, I want my Outlook to be there in Quest so that I can do both my meetings, my heads up email work, and be in meetings, unquote, and do all the other things he wants to do. Zuck wants to view all of his work as an experience inside of VR. And again, he's espoused this as sort of the right point of view. Earlier in the conversation, I'm sorry, I forgot this passage. Oh, no, I didn't. The TAM of primary equipment sold to knowledge workers is $200 million, 200 million units per year. That's massive. And I don't think you can view Zuckerberg's desire to drive Meta toward a place where it starts taking share out of that market without saying they want to build the operating system for headset based computing, right? Whatever AR, VR, MR. And so the most important question there is, to the extent that he wants to build the dominant operating system, we're going to see the next expression of open versus closed. We're going to see whether or not that's a meaningful question. And I think, so I'm putting a flag way far in the future, is there any sort of use case where Meta is going to be able to box out Apple? I think there are a number of use cases where Apple will be able to box out Meta. And not for nothing, it's not exclusive. But I think in the physical experience of building, uh, the experience of using physical products, right? Industrial design. Apple's track record speaks for itself. Meta's track record, it's not bad, but this is an incredibly nascent category, and the requirements are extraordinarily high in terms of building a physical object that a human being is willing to wear on their face for hours at a time. And then, assuming you can get over that hurdle, what you're left with is, okay, now I'm going to do things. And it's very clear that Microsoft will be more than happy to enable you to do work to the extent that your work requires Teams, Excel, Outlook, whatever else. And, according to Zuckerberg's number, it's 200 million people a year whose employers, more to the point, go buy hardware to the tune of 1,500 to $2,000 a pop to enable people to perform those use cases. I'd be shocked if Microsoft isn't equally motivated to deliver a class-leading version of that experience on hardware that Apple builds on Apple's platform. Maybe they won't. Maybe there will be bad blood from this Xbox streaming shenanigans. Maybe there will be some other reason. But I'd be really surprised if you can't run Excel, Teams, Outlook on an Apple headset or a headset made by anybody else. And so that to me is the solid ground from which to sort of look out and ask a question. It's like, what other use cases are there that are built by the developer community, not in-house use cases? Because Meta's in-house use cases will be fundamentally different from Apple's in-house use cases. Will there be overlap? Of course. You're going to have Messenger in a headset if you buy a Quest, and you're going to have iMessage in a headset if you buy it from Cupertino. Everybody knows this. But the use cases that are going to drive adoption, enterprise, knowledge work use cases being one bucket, entertainment use cases, which I think you got to subdivide between like cinema and interactive gaming use cases. And that's a good pin to come back to in the future, because when I, as an individual, think about what I'm interested in doing with hardware like this, I'm not opposed to believing that I'll have a better knowledge work experience with displays that are drawn by software that make me feel like I'm sitting at Bill Gates's battle station, no matter where I am. But there's also a part of me that thinks transporting someone to the best cinematic environment possible is a place where you might see Apple want to play, because they've made the investments in how to represent the audiovisual art that's created by people on their devices as best as possible. So that's something of a prediction, I suppose. Anyway, time to go to work. That's all I have to say.